Yo, what up, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers, aka MBB, aka Bangers, aka I've got the best cards for Mythical Islands on a list, ready to give it to you right here in this video and talk to you about why. And make sure you're staying tuned to the channel because I will be releasing some spicy deck lists that we're probably going to see for a long time in some variation, and some deck lists that you might want to try out yourself just in time for the tournament weekend. So let's dive in. So let's start with the 15th card on the list, and this is going to be a card that some people are really high on. Personally, I'm just kind of like, it's solid, it's decent, but it's not necessarily a world beater card in my opinion. It's just a nice solid addition to some decks. Personally, I wouldn't play it in my Mewtwo list, but I could see an argument for it in some other lists that are maybe trying to play a different strategy, or maybe they can't play at EXs, etc., etc. But let's start with Sigilif. This is going to be an 80 HP basic, 1 retreat cost, and for 1 psychic energy, you're going to be able to draw a card and deal 10 damage. Now, again, with cards like this, and cards like Caterpie, and cards like Meowth, and even to a degree cards like Chateau, now, I think that, it can be a little bit greedy in some cases. Maybe not Chateau too much, but I think that cards like Sigilif, cards like Caterpie and Meowth do leave you more open to red card in a tournament scene, especially if your opponent is playing red card. Now, if your opponent doesn't play red card in a tournament scene, these cards are going to be great because you're going to be able to pile up a lot of advantage and you're going to be able to go through your deck. But again, I just would not necessarily be very quick to play this in Mewtwo. I think that space is very limited in that deck, and I think that there are other cards that you need to play to have a chance to compete at the highest level. But still, a very solid card from the newest mini set. Now, going to our next card. Drudgedagon is a pretty interesting dragon type with no weakness, and you see that double retreat cost, and it would scare you away until we added a card by the name of Leaf, which you may or may not see on this list later on. But the Pokemon ability for Drudgedagon is that if it takes any damage while it is in the active spot by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, it's going to deal 20 damage back. So even if it gets knocked out, it's going to deal 20, but if it, if they just deal 50 to it, it's going to deal 20 back. So it's a good way to kind of, either, make your opponent think twice about attacking, or just straight up, get damage for attacking. So it's a pretty solid effect. And in a lot of the decks that you're going to see this card in, it's not even going to play both of the energy types. There is one exception, and this card is going to slot perfectly into Flareon Greninja decks. However, that's going to be mostly in the non-EX format. So again, this card does have a home, especially in the no EX format, but it will also splash into some decks in the regular, open format as well. But again, you're going to need Leaf most likely in the deck, and you're probably not playing the dual energies. All right, going into the 13th card in the list, this is going to be Marshadow, which was one of the cards that I was pretty excited to cook with. And honestly, it's not a terrible card. It's just one of those cards that it needs to find a solid home. And fighting types right now are a little interesting, but even in the no EX format, it kind of is an interesting card. But basically 80 HP, 1 retreat cost, a weakness to psychic, but for 2 energy, if a Pokemon was knocked out, you're going to be able to deal 60 more damage on top of that 40 base. So this could be 2 energy for 100 damage, which is very strong, but it's conditional. By the way, just a quick plug, on my Twitter, I do a card of the day, and I actually did rate this card already, but definitely check out my Twitter. It's a place where I try to post a card of the day every day of the week, Monday through Friday. So that way you can kind of, maybe come check out what I score some of these cards at. And then who knows, maybe a month from now, 2 months from now, I look like an idiot for some of these card scores. Who knows? But I just love card of the day. So I want to make sure that I take a second to plug that while we're talking about these individual cards. But again, Marshadow, really solid card. I think it's solid. I think it's probably about, the right spot on the list. Okay, going which I believe, let's see, 15, 14, 13. So 12th card on the list, number 12. This is going to be Rapidash. And I do think that this is probably an upgrade over the Rapidash that we have had. Even though it has that 2 energy cost, I do think that you can get away with playing this Rapidash, and I think that it will get value out of it. And you know, the whole appeal of the other Rapidash was that if you went first and opened Ponyta, you can just immediately slap down that Rapidash on your second turn and potentially Blaine for 70 damage, and that's tough for a lot of decks to deal with, especially in the no EX format. But in just the open format, I think you're going to want that extra potential for damage. I mean, we're talking about potentially dealing 120 damage without weakness if you flip a heads and have Blaine. That's incredible, for 2 energy. That's actually incredible. So I do think that the upside of this Rapidash is actually really, really good. Personally, I would probably maybe shy away from the Ponyta. I don't know. The Ponyta is kind of, it's iffy. But, I do think that there is maybe a straight upgrade for both of these, the Ponyta and the Rapidash in Blaine stacks. But me, again, I do think that I will be playing this Rapidash as opposed to the other Rapidash in my Blaine stacks. All right, let's move on to the next card on the list. This is card number 11. This is Tauros. Now, Tauros is a card that I wasn't too high on until I really started thinking about it, and then I really started kind of taking other people's opinion too. And in a deck that was maybe playing Wigglytuff and, using 3 energies and, just manually attaching, I think that Tauros could easily take that place, right? I think that Tauros, even though it does have a chunky attack cost, I think you want to pair this with cards that are basically, very cheap, efficient attackers. Who knows? We may even see, a card like Executor EX, right, get paired with Tauros. We may see, Wheezing Arbok decks play Tauros, just to have, that extra pop damage potentially after they poison something, and then they just, send in Tauros to finish it off. But again, Tauros is going to be a normal type, 100 HP basic. For 3 energy, it's going to deal 40 damage, and if your opponent's Pokemon is an EX, it's going to deal 80 more damage. So really good card if you can get it online. And again, I think that in a lot of the times that you're going to be playing this card, you're going to be able to passively attach energy because you have a cheap, efficient attacker already in your active or ready to go. So that's kind of the mindset in playing this card. Definitely can make your math right in a lot of knockouts. So really, really good card for combating EXs. Obviously, in the no EX format, you're just going to play the other Tauros, but this is still a really solid card. Now, going to number 10, Pidgeot EX was a card that I spent some time playing at midnight, and it was solid. It just, one of the things that is really tough about Pidgeot EX is you have to play bad cards to make this card, sometimes win the game, right? Like, you have to play Pokeflute, and Pokeflute is kind of iffy, man. Like, honestly, when you open Pokeflute, you feel kind of bad, right? It's like, oh man, now this card, I gotta wait for this card to be live. But when it finally is live, you're finishing games with Pokeflute and Pidgeot. But Pidgeot is a 170 HP normal Pokemon, and it is a stage 2, but for 3 energy, it deals 80 plus 20 more damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. It's got 1 retreat cost and a weakness to electric type. So solid card, but again, we'll see where it finds its home. All right, going to number 9. The 9th card that I have on the list is going to be, or the number 9 card, not the 9th card, but the number 9 card is going to be Leaf. Leaf is a excellent supporter that is going to be flexed into a lot of decks. Personally, I'm a big fan of 1 Leaf, 1 X speed. That's personally the way that I've enjoyed playing it so far, just so that way, hey, there's going to be some turns where you research into an X speed, and that's going to be like perfect. And then there's going to be some turns where you just play Leaf because it makes your retreat free. Or maybe it lowers your executor down to 1 retreat cost, and you just pay the retreat cost. But I do think that that 1/1 line of Leaf and X speed is really solid. And then there's going to be some decks that just play double Leaf and no X speeds just because their retreat costs are pretty chunky. So again, Leaf, during this turn, your retreat cost or your active Pokemon is 2 less. But again, I do think that this is one of the better supporters. And although spoiler alert, I don't have blue on this list, I think that blue can, have an equally important impact just for a smaller amount of decks. Like, I think that more decks will probably play Leaf than decks that will play blue, and that's why you don't see blue on this list. All right, moving to number 8. Now, number 8 is a really interesting spicy card because it's going to have a great matchup into what I think is one of the best decks, if not the best deck right now, which is Mewtwo, Scolipede. So Scolipede is 140 HP, stage 2 Pokemon that's dark, and it does 70 damage for 2 energy, but if your opponent's Pokemon is, if their active Pokemon is poison, it's actually going to deal 50 more damage. So this is potentially, having the ability to one-shot Mewtwo. Obviously, it's got to be poisoned. And it's going to take out a lot of EXs, right? There's going to be some EXs that it can't knock out in one shot. The poison can help knock out the Mewtwo, for example. But when you take a look at this card, a lot of people will say, well, why wouldn't I just play Muck? And they're fundamentally just really different. There's so many differences. Like, one difference is obviously the energy cost for the attacks, right? Like, this is 1 energy cheaper than Muck. And then on top of that, you can Koga your Muck, right? But if you're using Koga on your Muck, I mean, you're probably trashing some energy with it, so that kind of feels bad. But Scolipede is a very nice finisher, especially after you poison a really big, basic EX, and then you kind of send this in to finish it off, or potentially just win the game on the spot. But Scolipede, I do think it has potential, especially because of the typing. And, this is going to be a card that you're going to see in a lot of quote unquote, like meta call decks, right? But I do think that this has potential. You might be able to pair it with something like a Weezing. But again, we'll see how this goes. It may be a little bit much to pair it with Weezing and Arbok. It might be too much. Now, coming in at number 7, a card that I was really excited to play with, and honestly, it's been very solid. I just think that there's other, very good cards in the set as well. But the 7th card, number 7 on this list, is going to be Vaporeon. And Vaporeon has one of the most unique abilities in the game so far. It's called Washout. It's as often as you like during your turn, you may move a water energy from one of your bench Pokemon to your active water Pokemon. So it's strictly water Pokemon, but it's as often as you like. It's got 120 HP body, which is very important because it's going to survive a lot of attacks, including the infamous Pikachu EX attack, right? They're going to need a lot of help to knock this out, right? So 90 plus the 20 for weakness, and then they're going to need that Giovanni. So it's going to be something that that will come up and will be pretty sad when it happens, but they will have to work for that knockout and have a lot of things go right. Again, the electric weakness is something that will stand out. The 2 retreat cost is something that is mitigated most of the time with a card like Leaf, because that's usually played in a lot of the decks that I think you're going to see Vaporeon be played in. But again, this ability is really fascinating because you're able to basically soak damage on a card like a Starmie EX, pivot out of it, send in another water EX, whether it's Gyarados, whether it's Articuno, whether it's Lapras, which Lapras is probably the worst at all those, but you're going to be able to go ahead and soak damage and then move energy around. So that's kind of the big draw that Vaporeon has, but we're still trying to figure out, is Vaporeon something that's necessary for a card like Gyarados, or, do you just play another version of that Gyarados? Speaking of Gyarados, here's number 6 on the list. Now, let's talk about Gyarados for a second. It kind of felt like Genetic Apex's Arcanine EX, where in the beginning, people saw Gyarados, just like they saw Arcanine, they were like, oh, it's just not that good, right? 180 HP, that's pretty thick. Like, you have to take that in. Like, that survives Mewtwo Giovanni, right? Like, that survives a lot of attacks. Obviously, it survives Pikachu, right? Pikachu's only hitting this for 110. The only thing that you would have to worry about is like a Zapdos EX with like 3 heads and a Giovanni, or a Zapdos with 4 heads, right? Raichu doesn't even knock this out in one shot, right? Raichu and Giovanni, that's going to deal, I think 170 is how much that would deal. So I mean, you're still short damage. The weakest part of Gyarados is going to be the Magikarp. However, the new Magikarp allows you to kind of get out of the active spot if that's the Pokemon that you start with. Now, as for what's the best pair with Gyarados, well, that's the thing that we're all kind of worried about, right? That's the thing that we're all trying to guess at. Is it better to play, cards like Starmie EX where you can win the game with just Starmie EX sometimes? Or is it better to play it with something like a Vaporeon as well as a Starmie EX? Or do you just play bulky water types and just let them take the hits while you build up your Gyarados? That's kind of the big question, right? But again, the 4 energy attack, it's going to deal 140. So that's going to be something that's not going to knock out a Mewtwo. But I think that's why you're going to see a lot of Gyarados decks playing 2 Giovanni, at least 1, so that way they can get that 1-hit KO on the Mewtwo and not worry about getting Revenge knocked out. Now, one big weakness you'll see with Gyarados going into Mewtwo decks is going to be Jinx. Like, Jinx is definitely going to be a card that, personally, I think you're going to see in every Mewtwo list that's doing very well for a while, right? Because it just helps answer a lot of things just like Gyarados EX. But again, for that 140 damage for 4 energy, it's actually going to discard a random energy among the energies attached to all Pokemon. So it might discard the one on your bench, it might discard the Gyarados itself, it might discard your opponent's active, it might discard your opponent's bench. You don't know, right? Like, that's kind of the one big drawback. But I do think that this is strictly better than the non-EX version just because it does 140 and it can knock out a Mewtwo. Like, that damage threshold is huge. It's going to knock out legendary birds, it's going to knock out opposing Starmies, it's going to knock out Mewtwo, Pikachu. I mean, the list goes on and on of the EX Pokemon that it's going to knock out. But we're seeing a very clear power creep in the terms of EX is getting more HP, and that's slightly making cards like Pikachu EX kind of, their weaknesses are kind of showing a little bit more with the power creep, right? The lack of bulk and the lack of damage. So speaking of Pikachu, here it is. I mean, this is going to be a card that I know a lot of people are going to be surprised to see at number 5. I think this is one of the best cards in the decks or in the set because it's going to go into one of the best decks. If you jam games with this card and you're playing Pikachu, you're going to have turns where you have, you basically send in Dedenne, and Dedenne paralyzes something, and that allows you to basically just win the game. And the paralyze is super manageable. You're only giving up 1 prize if it fails and gets knocked out. And then, again, it's just one of those curveballs, right? Like, Pinch was really good, but this is a lower HP Pinch with the same retreat cost and a cheaper attack. Now, granted, that 20 damage for Pinch was nice, but the best part of Pinch was the paralyzed chance, right? But Dedenne, the reason why I have it so high on this list is it's going to be put into a deck that's already proven. Like, there's nothing that Pikachu needs to prove. It's going to keep being Pikachu. It's going to keep being good. And, it did get a few more toys, right? The new Electabuzz, hey, if you're playing Surge and Raichu, like the old Raichu, yes, it's going to fit right in. So again, I think that the reason why I have this card so high on the list is it's going to have great times where it just shines and gets that heads and allows you to win the game because you got that extra turn, and it's going to be slotted into one of the best decks already in the game. So that's why I have this card so high on the list, and it's really cool to see a common and some uncommons in this list. Hint, hint, hint. But again, for 60 HP, electric type, weakness to fighting, Thundershock, 10 damage, 1 energy, and again, flip a coin if heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is paralyzed. Alright, so now let's get to the spicy part of the list. So Superior is something that we were kind of surprised to see in the set, but we were even more surprised to see that it basically doubles your energies, right, for all your grass Pokemon. This card is really, really good. The problem is, obviously, it's a stage 2, and the only deck that has more search and more draw than anything is Psychic. So if we had a mythical slab for grass types, I mean, this deck would just be insane, right? But Superior is really good. It's 110 HP stage 2. And its Pokemon ability says for each grass energy attached to your grass Pokemon, it provides 2 grass energy. This effect doesn't stack, so you only get it for 1 Serperior. Now, there's some interesting interactions that I want to make sure everybody knows. So basically, if you have a Serperior out and you have a Serebii out, if it has 2 energies attached to the Serebii, 2 grass energies, you're going to flip 4 coins. Now, on the flip side of that is, if your opponent sends in a Jinx, they're going to do damage based on 4 energies instead of 2 if you have Serperior out. So that's going to be one thing that people are going to need to watch out for, and I think that that's why Jinx is going to be very popular in the next coming weekends in Mewtwo list as that, quote-unquote 6th basic. But again, Serperior really good. For 4 energy, it deals 70. I think it's the first Pokemon with Solar Beam in pocket. But anyways, only 2 retreat costs, and I say only because if you have 1 at energy, you're able to retreat with that 1 energy. If you have 2 energies, you're able to attack for 70. Somewhat glassy, but they had to make it that way, right? They gave it a bigger body, like 150 HP. That would be probably way too good, right? Because at that point, it's surviving things like Blaine's Ninetales. But again, Arcanine is going to eat this. Ninetales is going to eat this. Obviously, Charizard eats everything. So there's a lot of fire types that still are going to have a shot to knock this out. Also, the new Rapidash, right? All right, going to number 3 is Serebii EX. So Serebii is like a souped up, it's like a souped up, let's see, what's that card? The Evolved Marowak, right? It's like a souped up Marowak EX. I've seen people flip like 20 coins with this card on some screenshots, and it's just kind of crazy. But basically, it says, Grass type EX. It's a basic for 130 HP, and for 2 energy, it's going to flip a coin for each energy attached to this Pokemon, and it's going to deal 50 for each heads. It is worth noting that Mew EX does copy this attack and flip coins as well. So don't be surprised to see a Mew copy this attack and then flip coins. So keep that in mind. But again, very strong card, 1 retreat cost, obviously the weakness to fire, and it's somewhat glassy, so Ninetales, Arcanine, there are ways that it can knock it out with the Blaine, right, when you talk about the Ninetales. And then again, even cards like that new Rapidash are going to have a chance to knock this out with Blaine. So it does have weaknesses, and again, you are depending on coin flips, but this is going to be a very popular card for a while. If you play the ladder at all, like you just randomly queue into games, you're seeing this card a lot. But still, really good card. One of the best cards in the set, in my opinion, and a card that it's cool to see grass types getting a lot of getting a nice little power jump, right? The days of Venusaur are probably numbered. It's probably done, and hey, that's okay. Maybe they make a better Venusaur later on. All right, the second best card in the entire set, and I know a lot of people will probably say it's the best card in the set, it's going to be Mew EX for me. Mew EX is really, really good. It fits right into one of the best decks already, right? And Mewtwo and Gardevoir. And it fits into a lot of other decks too. Like you might be able to splash this in decks that are playing Weezing and Arbok and so on. But again, Mew EX, it's going to be a basic Psychic type, 130 HP. For 1 energy, it's going to deal 20 damage. For 3 energy, it's going to copy your opponent's active Pokemon's attack. So one of the big interactions that a lot of people are waiting to see is how does this work against a Charizard EX? And it copies the Charizard. And let's just say that you don't have any fire type energies attached to your Mew EX. It's not going to discard any. It's still going to deal the 200 damage, but it's not going to discard any. So yeah, Mew EX is legit. It's very good. However, it does have some limitations. For example, like if you're going up against a Pikachu EX, Mew EX is kind of not as good, right? So it does have its limitations, but overall, I mean, one of the best cards in the set, one of the best cards in the game, played in one of the best decks in the game, if not the best deck in the game. So really good card. And so this probably is making you wonder, like, what's number 1 if this is number 2? So the number 1 card in the set, in my opinion, is going to be Mythical Slab. Now, this may be controversial to some people, but I have a few reasons to justify this. So let's talk about this for a second. So first of all, this is an item card, meaning you can play 2 of them in the same turn. The other thing I would say is, when you read the effect, look at the top card of your deck. If that card is a Psychic Pokemon, put it in your hand. If it is not a Psychic Pokemon, put it at the bottom of your deck. So people may think, oh man, you're just going to -1 yourself. Like, and that's 100% true. Sometimes you're just losing a card. But what you're doing is you're getting closer to your actual win conditions. You're getting closer to your psychic Pokemon. So this card just fits right into Mewtwo and Gardevoir. Now, obviously, you should play 2 of them. If you're not playing 2 of them, I don't think that you're trying to win if you have the 2 cards, right? But, realistically, this card should be in every Psychic deck unless there's some weird reason to not play it, right? Like 99% of Psychic decks should play this card. And that's really crazy to say, right? Like, that's really crazy to say. I mean, we're talking about Alakazam decks, we're talking about Gengar decks, we're talking about, obviously Mewtwo and Gardevoir, but like even future Psychic decks, like this card should be a 2 of more times, probably almost every time, right? And so again, when you just take a look at the power level of Psychics, for whatever reason, the Pokemon company loves to give Psychic really good cards. And if any other type, if Grass had a card like this, it would be really good. If Fire had a card like this, it would be really good, right? And like, it's because it's getting you closer to your win conditions. That's all it is. And another way to think about it is like this. Every other deck is playing probably 2 Pokeballs and probably 2 Professor's Research. Psychic has the advantage of playing not only those 4 cards, but it also gets an additional 2 slabs. Now, what does that mean? It means that you're basically playing a 14 card deck in some cases, right? You're just thinning your deck. You're going through your deck. Even if you don't hit, you're going through your deck. Now, realistically, I think the biggest debate we're going to have on this card is when you should play it. Like, if you have Pokeball or Professor's Research and you have Slab, what's the order that you should play? And I'm leaning more towards the idea that, hey, play the Pokeball first, play the Professor's Research first, and then play the Slab. So that way you're getting closer to your Gardevoir, or you're getting closer to the Mewtwo that you need, or the Mew, or the Jinx. That's probably my thought. And that's actually changed from the other video that I put out where I just talked about how busted, Mewtwo and Gardevoir is now. But anyways, that's my list. Let me know what you think about the list, what cards I left off. For example, I could have definitely added cards like Primeape. I could have definitely added, other cards, maybe even like Electabuzz, maybe the Pikachu, maybe Exeggutor, maybe Ponyta. Obviously, Magikarp is a card that is just a straight up upgrade in my opinion. Maybe even a card like Salandit should have been on the list. But let me know in the comments what you think about the list. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope you stay tuned because, again, I will be posting some deck lists to get you ready for this weekend. And, hey, maybe you take some of those ideas, maybe you kind of make some tweaks of your own, and then maybe you're able to win or top in some of these new tournaments coming up this weekend.